to do well in the US and I think life. Really embracing that individuality is kind of key, and kind of knowing what that is and being comfortable with that.
Without further ado, I want to introduce you to Robbie Allan, who I've also known about the same time as Bethany, but this time from a different organization, the UN Youth Association of New Zealand, where we used to partake and gallivant around the world, trying to feel like we knew what Model UNs were about. But it's awesome that we've all ended up in the same place here. Robbie's an experienced SaaS product leader with top-tier strategy background and world-class B2B SaaS experience, deep in mobile with head for sales and marketing. Robbie's recently joined Meta, and he has worked for top companies including Zynga, SurveyMonkey, and McKinsey. He's got a BCom from University of Canterbury, B.CA honors from Victoria University of Wellington, and an MBA from University of California, Berkeley. He has been recognized with Outstanding GSI award from UC Berkeley and the New Zealand Prime's Business Scholarship. So I'm really excited to have you today, Robbie. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to share, and I'm excited for everyone else to get to know you as well.
Thanks, Divya. I'm going to try and unwind this. What I thought I might do today was just share a little bit about my journey to get here, pretty much. So, I've done a bunch of things, some of them right, most of them wrong. My current role at Meta, I lead monetization for WhatsApp business messaging. So WhatsApp is the world's largest product, used by over 3 billion people. We're roughly a $1 billion run rate business, which seems like a lot. In Meta's context, sort of not so much. So that's where I'm at in my kind of journey of working in technology here. But wanted to share a little bit about sort of how I came to be here. I've been living in San Francisco for 11 years. And since there's a bunch of Kiwis here, we'd love to share just a few things I've learned about kind of America and Americans that kind of I learned the hard way that maybe you don't need to. So first up, I'm from Otautahi, Christchurch. Kind of went to St Andrews College down there because that's the thing that we care about in Christchurch. And unlike Beth, who Divya failed to mention, we were actually roommates at one point during college. So I've shared a couch with Beth at times, and actually we now happen to live just opposite each other in San Francisco, coincidentally. Beth dropped out of high school. I was the opposite. I loved high school and kind of did really well at university, and sort of got a lot of that kind of positive kind of reinforcement. And so won a bunch of awards, got into this kind of fancy consulting firm, and then sort of came to the US and had a little bit of this attitude of hey, I was kind of a big deal in New Zealand. I guess I'll be a big deal here. And got to UC Berkeley, and that just wasn't the case, right? In New Zealand, working at kind of McKinsey and Company, which is this management consulting firm, there were 3 people I hired during my year. The US is teeming with them. Everyone sort of has this thing, and so there was a sort of a casualness that I'd had when I came to the US, and a bit of an arrogance as well, that I really needed to kind of unlearn as I came to kind of Berkeley and came to work in the US. One thing I think that you'll hear a lot of people say is Americans are much more about trumpeting their achievements, and they're really good public speakers, and it's a really important thing for Kiwis to learn, which is totally true. But the twist that I'd love to kind of put on that is about embracing individuality, because I think in its best frame, that's what I think America does really, really well. What we can learn from people that are American, and what I've kind of picked up a little bit is first to be absolutely fine with your own individuality and who you are. You'll have heard a lot about tall poppy syndrome and all those sorts of things, and certainly Berkeley as a place is incredibly individual. It just works the way it works. It's kind of weird, all the rest of it. And I think as New Zealanders, we sort of hide that. I certainly know that I tried to sort of be very normal and acceptable and tried to sort of hide the little parts of me that were different. But I think to do well in the US, and I think life, really embracing that individuality is kind of key, and kind of knowing what that is and being comfortable with that. The second part of that embracing individuality is sharing it. In general, Americans are very good at telling you what they're about without sort of fear or shame or anything Any compliment you give a New Zealander, they need to kind of explain, to you in detail why it's not true, right? Like, really knowing who you are is an enormous kind of opportunity of living here, and also, kind of journey we can go through to sort of understand that. And the sort of, I think, third thing to take from that is focus. So in New Zealand, we tend to be kind of, or like I think of my career as being like a sort of generalist management person with a little bit of tech. Here, my focus is much more business to business software focused on growth or maybe monetization for like a certain set of products. It's a very, very big place, and so skills are much more specialized. And I think the corollary of embracing who you are is really embracing a focus to say, look, I don't have to be good at everything or experienced in everything. I can be just really good at this one thing, which I think the US does really well, and was certainly something that I picked up at business school, or at the experience of coming to the US, which happened to me through business school. After that, I worked for a period of time at Zynga, which was that like kind of online gaming thing. I worked on Farmville, which was like a really big Facebook game at the time. You might remember it, some nods of recognition. And at the end of business school, I basically had the choice. Do I go back to Zynga and take this job? Or I also had some friends who were like, hey, move to New York, let's try and raise some money and start this business. I had no idea what I was doing, but it just seemed really fun to kind of, and while more uncertain, to have more sort of potential, both for learning and kind of reward if I went to New York. And what we did there, learned a huge amount, didn't get particularly far at all, raised a bunch of money, pretty much lost all of it, sold the business, but basically just everyone got to keep their jobs. But the learning from that was to make something people want. If you ever read anything that's come out of kind of Y Combinator or Silicon Valley, they talk all the time about like making something people want. And a thing I've observed about, I think, my own experience in New Zealand and companies coming out of New Zealand is that often there's this belief that just one patent or one relationship or one distribution agreement or something like that will kind of lead to riches. That it's all about sort of selling, is all about relationship, and can I kind of get close to you, or is there a hookup that's sort of out there or something like that? And I think it's never been more true that just making something that customers really want and is so outrageously good that people really like it, all the other stuff, all the funding, all the distribution, all those other sorts of things will sort of fall in place. And it's incredibly easy to get kind of sucked into this idea of playing founder and setting up businesses and going to conferences. None of that actually really matters. You've sort of got to do it. But if you have a great product, your business will go fine. And if you don't, and you do all the other stuff right, your accounts are perfect and you've spoken at all the conferences, you won't get far at all. And that's something I think that the US does really well that New Zealand could certainly learn from. After that, so was in New York, kind of business failed, came back to San Francisco and started working at a range of software companies. So I worked for a SurveyMonkey, which does like online surveys, and a company called Intercom, which is the sort of annoying chat thing, which you might have used at some point. And what I found, this was my first experience really working in kind of US businesses, because if you sort of start your own business, it doesn't really count, the rules don't apply to you. And a thing that I found, I had a boss sit me down and give me the feedback that what I thought was engaging in a sort of funny or jovial way just wasn't coming across that way. I think as New Zealanders, we often embrace cynicism, both to kind of protect ourselves and just as a way of relating. Right, we kind of talk down our experiences, or we'll pick holes in things, or we may make a sort of a sly comment, and that doesn't fly in the US. An Irish friend of mine described her American colleagues as singing the school song really loudly, which I think is a really good way to think about it. I think what works in the sort of US workplace is like enthusiasm and getting behind things, and I think partly that's cultural and partly because I think it's true of life, that it's a very large world we live in, and certainly the US and the world in general has a huge amount of opportunities for people, and so we really should all be doing things that we're really excited about. Totally fine if you're not excited about this thing, but being kind of cynical or critical of it's not particularly helpful. Just go and do something else. There are sort of so many things, and again, if you really understand and embrace your own individuality and focus, we can and should all do things that we celebrate and are excited by, and I think that's something that the US really has to teach us. The final part, so after working in these sort of software companies, doing a bunch of individual contributor work, started to do more kind of managing teams, all that sort of stuff, pretty normal career path. And a lot of stakeholders, people that you need to work with, that you need their support, people that are, work for you, that you work for, that you don't work for, that buy from you, all these sort of people with all these interests to sort of be balanced. And I remember one time getting this sort of piece of feedback or a suggestion that sort of really struck with me, that struck me about empathy, that I'd really love to share, because I think of all the things we do, most stuff is people stuff. If you think about at home, at work, in kind of organizations, all the issues are pretty much people issues. It's very rare that it's kind of too technical or anything else. Maybe you can't agree on a problem. It's usually a disagreement about how to think about it rather than, disagreeing on how to add numbers up or something like that. And it's empathy that brings those kind of disagreements together, that allows us to sort of hear each other. And certainly I've found when I shifted to focus more on kind of empathy, was able to, get much further with other people. And I think my kind of Kiwi roots would often focus on the issue rather than the people. And so I'd love to share with you this little sort of parable that my manager shared with me. And the situation is this: you're about to go to some sort of event, maybe it's an award event, whatever. You're both very excited. It's pretty high consequence. You've both dressed up, your tuxes or dresses or kind of whatever it might be, and you're sort of in the chute. You're about to leave. It's time to sort of get showered and put your clothes on, and then kind of take a taxi to the event, and it will all be happening. And your partner comes to you, like you're getting ready, and it's like, oh my gosh, I've left my dress, tux, whatever, at the dry cleaners. Dry cleaners are closed, it's late, like you're not getting it back. What do you say to them? I'd love to take suggestions, and we'll work through this together. What would you say to your partner in that situation? What was that? See you later. Yeah, so you're like, all right, I'm going to go to the event. I'll kind of leave you there. So it's certainly one approach we could take. Any other suggestions? Truly, what would you say?
Listen to your wife.
Listen to your wife? Say more, Xavier. What do you mean?
Whatever she wants.
So,
I would stay with her if she wants to go.
yeah. So you're saying you'd stick around, you'd stay with your partner. That makes sense. I think a lot of people would do that. What would the first thing you say to her be, though? Like she's literally just going like, hey, I haven't got my dress. It's at the dry cleaners. What's the first thing you say? Love this. Bummer, I heard. I'll just pick up on this. And wear another dress. Awesome. Any other suggestions? These are both totally make sense. So this sounds a little bit like this sucks. This is a bad situation. And this is a sort of a problem-solving response, right? Like, hey, let's wear another dress. We can find something else for you. Is that right? Awesome. Any other suggestions? What else might we say? Yeah. Yeah, perfect. So that sounds. The suggestion was, could you call a friend and kind of borrow a dress? And I could kind of place that similarly. You're trying to solve the sort of problem at hand. Absolutely, totally normal response. It makes a lot of sense. Anything else people might do? Yeah, Priyanka. You could buy another dress. Yeah, totally. Creative problem solving. I put that alongside the suggestions we had before. So let's get to the root of sort of solving the issue that seems to be the problem at hand. Makes a lot of sense. There was a hand at back. Yeah. What was that? Sorry. Oh, you'd say, hey, please don't kill me for what I'm about to say. And what would you be about to say? What's the next thing after that? Got it, yeah. So we go to hey, you're going to have to sort of find a different one. I'd almost frame that as kind of laying out the problem. Hey, the reality is you're going to have to find a different dress. Yeah, Leslie. What can I do to help you? Cool, I love that as well. Almost like reinforcing that you're alongside the other person. I love that. Thank you. Matt.
Not what I would do, but
yeah.
A response you can have could be a negative one as well, being like, why'd you do that?
Totally. Why'd you do that? Right. Yeah. You could go, why are you doing that? I love that. All good responses, and I think I can almost imagine myself having said all of these in different places. And what I'd love to share is a characterization of those different responses. as it was presented to me, and a suggestion for how we might handle that in the future, and a suggestion that I use all the time and have found to be incredibly useful, despite it sounding kind of bizarre. So one level of response, I don't think we heard anything quite like this, is basically, they're there, it's all right? You're trying to pacify the person, it's okay. You might have noticed it often doesn't work very well. The reason it doesn't work very well is because here's someone who's upset. It means a lot to them. It's very much not all right for them. And you're saying, it's okay. And so by doing that, we're totally denying their reality. It's like, they're like, no, I don't think you get me. It's not okay. This is a big event. I haven't got my dress, or my tux, whatever. This is not okay. So one part is we can try and sort of reassure them, but often that kind of backfires. And next thing we start to is problem solve, right? Totally reasonable. Problem is we haven't got the dress or the tux. Let's go and get you another one. The setup of this problem was a little bit like, there's no great solutions here. We can maybe buy another one, but we're going to be late, and you could talk to a friend or whatever. But these are all sort of second best solutions. And in general, in that moment, it's also sort of not what we want. In general, you may have found people don't often like being problem solved in that moment, and you'll get kind of pushback as well. There's a third suggestion which was like, oh, that's a bummer. And actually I'd suggest that's a really lovely place to start, and the kind of advice I got and the advice I'd sort of pass on was that this is a really nice place to start because it acknowledges the person's experience of things, right? That hey, you're upset, this sucks. In your world, this situation kind of sucks. And at least it aligns you with sort of them. And the suggestion that was presented to me, and one that I use all the time, and it is going to sound a bit crazy and psychologist-y, but it's incredibly effective, is to basically take bummer one step further and to help the other person understand that you know what's going on for them and why it's a problem. So, that's a bummer. You haven't got your dress or tux, and I know that this was really important to you. So you're kind of restating what they've said in as many words. It sounds kind of crazy. It sounds like it's not particularly helpful and doesn't try to sort of solve the problem. But what I've found time and again is that, and this advice that she sort of shared with me and I've used all the time, as crazy as it sounds, by just helping repeat back someone else's own experience and making sure that you understand them for the first 30 seconds or minute, 2 minutes, if we're there an hour, 2 days later, it's okay, maybe it's time to get over this and we need to find a new dress or solve the problem. But at the very initial part, in any situation, work, school, organizations, especially intimate relationships, just actually first going, hey, I get why you're upset, even if you don't agree, even if it was probably their fault. It's dude, I told you, babe, you should have picked this thing up. And yet again, starting with the hey, this is a bummer, this really sucks, builds incredible empathy, ultimately. It is empathy, and it builds incredible relationships, and it also opens the door to the problem solving, kind of in my consistent experience. Probably the biggest lesson that I've learned while I'm here, maybe not particularly America specific, but I think it's one that's really kind of useful, interesting, relevant, and sort of would encourage you to try and see how you go. So thanks. It's been a treat to sort of share all this.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Robbie. It was so fascinating to hear that parable and how you really grasped onto that and how it does relate to multiple areas of life, and certainly one that I will be practicing, and I'm sure my husband will be delighted I'll be practicing that. With that, I would love to open up the floor to any questions. Yes?
Thanks, Robbie. So I was interested to hear your perspective of product being made the core of the business. And I guess contrast that with Daniel's talk about the medical technology and all this future technology. And I guess from my experience as well, we know in the medical field, the product is perhaps sometimes the least important part of the problem. It's the incentive, it's the reimbursement, all these other things. So I guess maybe the question is, coming from big tech and big tech trying to get into healthcare, how do you think that's going to go? And I mean, you see some examples from Amazon already, having tried something to pull back. Do you have any sense of how those two things will happen?
Interesting. So the question was basically, hey, you said it's all about product. The other guy said that it's really important to get things, right with healthcare. It's about kind of distribution, incentives, and how aren't we thinking about the contrast? Is that right?
Yeah, it's more about, I guess, just different fields. It's like, really it's consumer, in the consumer world, perhaps. Or
Yeah.
It's more about product, right? Than other complex industries, for example, maybe other parts.
Yeah. No, I mean, like in the clarification, I think you summed it up right. Like it's certainly an overreaching sort of statement for me to say like it's all about product, because you do have to get these sort of other things right. And I would carve out like kind of healthcare, highly regulated industries, super different. Healthcare more about, I think, kind of getting insurance codes and a whole bunch of other stuff. It's also not really it's not a sort of a free market in the sense of like most other things, like you'd buy and sell potatoes or computer chips. It's sort of highly regulated. So I definitely say, look, don't take my advice if you're in healthcare, certainly listen to Daniel. But I think in general, I think people over-index, or like my experience has been people coming from New Zealand and people in general over-index on all the stuff around product, and we'll focus on kind of sales and sort of all the other things. We are also seeing increasingly a trend towards more and more things being, highly sort of free market, right? So my favorite example in New Zealand being Sky TV. Sky TV would have told you if you'd asked them in the 1990s, we're an entertainment company, right? We were all about entertainment. We know about entertainment. Not true. They were the guys that like owned the only cable that went into your house that wasn't TV 1, 2, or 3. Right? And like owning a monopoly asset was their business. And you'd watch anything that went down that pipe that sort of wasn't, absolutely terrible. And so more and more we've seen like around the world, it's less about like monopoly assets. We've seen that with, it used to be the case, selling supermarkets was a really good example where it's like, hey, it's super important that like Kroger or, Countdown will sort of stock your product, and you truly could get there through like kind of one relationship. And like now that's not true. So increasingly, I think what we're seeing is like it's more and more about product. But you're absolutely right; it's not true everywhere. I'm not a particular expert in healthcare, and there's certainly places where it's still not true. But the arc of all of this is that more and more we're seeing with kind of technologies like the internet, with kind of like shipping, it's so much less about distribution and infrastructure, and so much more about just building a really great product. And so, I think in general, I would index more on that than I would on the other side. It's very easy to improve sales for a good product. You can't market or sell, ultimately you can't. Great marketing and kind of GTM won't solve a bad product. Yeah.
Thank you for that clarification. Other questions? Oh, maybe in the back first, yeah.
Robbie, can you help me understand how the commercial model for WhatsApp works?
Oh, yeah. So WhatsApp, who uses WhatsApp here? Yeah, great. You're among the sort of most of economically relevant humanity who uses it. Businesses sometimes want to send messages to their customers, and we charge them for that, essentially. It's not that common in Western English-speaking countries, but if you go to the likes of India or Brazil, many places you'll see like their number is sort of WhatsApp. And so increasingly businesses will use that in place of say SMS or email to talk to their businesses, to talk to their customers. And so we charge for it in sort of, roughly a similar fashion.
And you think that will evolve, that business to consumer will be more prevalent?
Well, that's what we're trying to do. I think the product right now, honestly, is not that much better from, not much better than email or SMS. What you'd get from a business over WhatsApp's kind of the same. Where we think the opportunity is to actually build, as I sort of mentioned before, like a radically better experience. So if you think of things like, a business might send you a sort of notification and say delivery's on the way, and it links you to a website, and the website spins and fails to load. What if right in the WhatsApp message, we could kind of show you the driver live? Or what if you could kind of you could scroll for products right from that message, or you could check out and pay right from that message, or you could, as opposed to having to download the Uber app, you could kind of share location and kind of, get a ride right from that message. We're in an incredibly unique position in that we own the protocol, right? Like we can do whatever we want on WhatsApp because we build it, we made it. And unlike email, which is a sort of an open protocol, still it's hard to make stuff animate in emails, or SMS is the same thing. It just does characters functions do that. We actually own the whole thing. So we're in this really an amazing position. I think that's really exciting, and it's just on us not to screw it up.
Thank you. I think we had one question here and then one there. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, current the market for the economy based on the challenges. Your roles here, what's the one biggest challenge?
Ooh, good question. Certainly from a meta point of view, it's the sort of shift in focus, right? In the market generally, let's say pre-COVID, it was all about growth. And so the bottleneck was like, how many people can we hire? How can we possibly grow? Let's just prove we're growing quickly. And if it's efficient or inefficient, doesn't really matter. That's really changed over the last 2 years, as people may have noticed. And so it's less about growth at all costs and much more about efficiency. And so just like the things you think about, the products or the features you prioritize, how you even allocate your resources, right? Like us specifically, even as early as 3 months ago, we would have expected another 500 engineers. Next year, I think we'll be one of the few places in Meta that grows, and we might get 5 or 50, right? So just radically, much less about kind of how can you grow quickly and put kind of resources to use as much as you can, and much more about like how can you efficiently use what you have.
And over there?
It might be related to that, but why does WhatsApp become a super app like WeChat?
So the question was, why doesn't WhatsApp become a super app like WeChat? Fundamentally, I think WeChat, partly it's a timing thing, right? So, in Western markets, like, we have Venmo, we have a whole bunch of other stuff. Like, we can't actually offer, a meaningfully better experience than sort of what's there. Like, you can kind of imagine it, but you sort of have to be, in some ways, inside WhatsApp. Like, what if you did everything on WhatsApp? Like, no one wants to do that. You just want a simpler and easier way to do stuff, right? So for Western markets, that's true. For other places, regulation, and that many company or governments are asking the question of like, hey, wait a minute, all the sort of revenue that we used to have here is now going to some company in the US, and so things like banking, even in starting to get into the space of telco, faces a huge amount of sort of regulation. So obviously we would love it if we could kind of do that, but ultimately we've got to be guided by like, what can we do that would be dramatically better for people, and not just let's just build it on our product and then say to people, please do it on our product because we'd like to make money off it. That's not a plan. And so I think that's why it's a pretty unique set of circumstances in China. Of course.
So last question, anyone else? Yes.
Yeah. So another question on the is product all that matters? Is distribution important? Is it shifting in that direction? Was I think the nature of your question. Distribution is obviously super important as well. It's the kind of build it and they'll come is certainly not true. You need to get good at understanding who will buy your product, how that will happen, what channels you'll kind of have. Please don't take away hey, the only thing that matters is product. Build something cool and just sort of magically kind of other things will happen. You've got to figure the other stuff out. I think it's almost a matter of process. So if you don't have a great product, we don't really understand what your product is, right? Let's have some imaginary product. Could we sell it to a supermarket? Maybe. Which supermarket should we sell it to? I don't really know because I don't really know much about my product, right? What is the messaging for this product? How do we pitch it? I don't really know because I don't really understand the sort of product. Who's it for? What even channel? Well, which supermarket? Should be a Whole Foods or sort of Safeway, high end or low end? Well, again, if I don't understand my product, I don't really know, it's I could put it in the wrong place because I'm not really sure who my buyer is and sort of why. By contrast, if you really deeply understand your product, and by that I mean you understand the user problem that your product solves, right? To my point about WhatsApp, we could build payments, but why would you use that as opposed to Venmo, right? It's got to be somehow better than Venmo and easier and quicker and genuinely meaningful, right? So if you understand the user problem and how your product's better, then all the other sort of marketing, distribution stuff falls out of that, right? Well, of course, these sort of people have those sort of problems. And, these sort of people read these publications or spend time in these websites or shop in these particular stores. And the way we should message it to them, is pretty obvious because we already understand like the benefit of this thing is it's, what was the benefit of WhatsApp? Like, sending images and stuff overseas didn't really work and it was expensive. It's like SMS, but free. Who is that of interest to? Anyone that wants to send, kind of talk to their friends, and especially internationally, right? So like if you get the value prop, which it kind of is core to the product, then sort of everything else kind of follows. The inverse is not true. It's very hard to go like, here's a product and try and, market it somehow, right? Like you have to do that well, you need to understand the value prop and sort of the product. So for sort of startups or people getting started, essentially that, and even maybe it isn't so much product, it's like the problem and the use case, right? Like what is it that your thing does radically better for someone else, than the alternative? And then from there, kind of you'll be great. And if you haven't got that, you're kind of dead in the water, I think. Cool.
Awesome.
Thanks, Divya.
Thank you so much, Robbie, for awesome talk around product, but also just how to lead with empathy in every part of your life. So I appreciate that. So with that, you have a little gift as well.
Thanks so much. That's lovely. Thank you.